began approximately 26 years ago when I was ill. From birth, I had asthma. Then later, I became a diabetic and impotent. So I visited the physician. I should. Everybody knows that you have to go to a physician when you're sick. So I did what everybody else were doing, which was consistent because that was the only thing I knew. So after many years of being sick, a friend of mine called me on the telephone and informed me about a Mexican that he felt could have complimented me. So I drove to Cuernavaca, Mexico, saw the man. The man gave me a regimen of herbs and dietary program. Went back to Los Angeles, and 97 days later, I didn't have any of the diseases that I went to him with. So I was very encouraged. At the time, I was working at Martin Luther King Hospital, and I then decided to do research on my own to see what it is that I could have helped humanity with, whether I would do it as good as Alfredo Cortez or add to what he was teaching me, and he did for me. And that was, everything began at that point.
Dr. Sebi, I can call you Dr. Sebi, right?
Yes, sir.
Let me ask you a question. In his book, Let's Get Well, Pablo Areola states that people of African descent are not programmed or cannot digest milk, cheese, and other dairy products. Could you elaborate on this?
Yes, this is the reason for establishing the African biomineral balance. When Mr. Pablo Areola made a statement that we are not programmed to digest milk if you are of African descent, I understood clearly what he was saying, but many of the readers of the book did not, primarily because there is a part of this whole healing process that need to be considered and was never brought to the forefront, whether that we were not as awakened or whether we just ignore it. That aspect is genetics. Genetics is very important because here Mr. Pablo Areola is showing us that if your ancestors are from Africa, that your body is not programmed to digest milk, so there must be a difference with the African race and any other race of people. That is his genetical structure. And this is the very foundation on which the USHA Research Institute has built its foundation, has built its edifice. And building the edifice based on genetics, then it necessitates a substance to be developed that would be consistent with that particular genetical group. This has not been considered by nutritionists or pathologists. And this is the reason why we at the USHA Institute feels that they have not really arrived at a point that they could complement as well as they would like to, because they have not considered genetics. Genetics is very extremely important. Why? Because everything on the planet is constructed genetically different, placed in a particular environment and on specific geographies. Like for instance, we talk about genetics, environment, they all are related. Why? Because the gorilla lives in Africa where the temperature is warm. It's in the tropics. But we find another gene group, the gorilla. He lives in Alaska where it is very cold. So we find now that one gene could live in an environment the other cannot. We also find that the gene group, the difference, could ingest certain substance, not so for the other. We are using the gorilla and the polar bear, for example. Again, the polar bear could ingest meat, and it would be proper with his dietary program, and consistent with his biological and genetical structure. As for the gorilla, he cannot ingest meat. It would be adverse to his particular gene. Why? Because he was not programmed or constructed in such a way. He lives in the forest where it's tropical. Your brain would not accept seeing a polar bear sitting under an acacia tree in the Serengeti plain in the month of August. Your brain would tell you that this is something that is uncosmic, that it is impossible. Again, we go to another structure. We go to the birds. The eagle, it eats meat, but not a quetzal. The quetzal does not eat meat, yet they both are birds. One eat meat, the other eat fruits. So we go to the plants. The plants also shows us that there is a genetical marriage to the whole cosmic arrangement of things. The plant, take for instance, the burdock. The burdock plant is a plant that lives in the temperate region. Its structure allows it to live in the temperate region. But as for the kalawala lives in the tropical region of the planet. The environment is not temperate, it is tropical, so it could live. So the plants are showing us that they too obey this cosmic arrangement. As for the food of the kalawala, we find that it lacks potassium phosphate. That is the predominant mineral. As for the burdock, it is iron. So we see that both plants obey just like the quetzal and the eagle. Like the gorilla and the polar bear, we have the kalawala and the burdock. They eat different foods and they live in different environment. So now, we find that in nature, there is and there should be an obedience for one to live to the optimum level of life. One has to be obedient to the cosmic arrangement. Like the plants, the animals, the birds, the gorilla. Now we go to the Homo sapien. As we take a close look at the Homo sapien, we find that he is the only one that feels that he is not bound to such law. And in feeling that he is not bound to the law of life, he have committed various violations. Like for instance, with genetics. We are talking about genetics because it is important to know what food is consistent with the so-called black race. If the foods of the gorilla and the polar bear is different, the quetzal and the eagle, then naturally it is necessary to understand that if it applies to all of the living species, whether plant or animal, it necessarily applies to man. And when we look at the whole table of nutrition that we, the so-called black people, has been presented with, we find that we're eating the same foods that the Chinese or European and Arabs eat. Then when in reference to medication, we also are given substance that everyone else receives. So we see where there is a gross inconsistency. It is genetics that was not considered, and this is the reason why many reports that has left the Usha Research Institute, the reports such as having the ability to reverse pathologies such as sickle cell anemia, blindness, and AIDS, and the rest, was because we considered an aspect of this journey that has yet to be considered by others. We talk about genetics because it is at that very point that everything is understood. Once we understand what complements and what doesn't complement, then we are on our journey to this thing we call healing. Because genetics was the most important aspect of it, and we omitted, didn't know, or whatever reason. But it was at that very point that we embark on the journey of the African biomineral balance, that was supposed to complement the genetical group of the so-called black man. With the birth of the African biomineral balance, we found that what is known as disease was not really disease. It was the manifestation of erosion caused by malnutrition. Malnutrition primarily among the African people. We were taken away approximately 400 years from our environment and from our food. Now put that into a meaningful equation and let us see what we're going to arrive at, that we will be able to help in the understanding of this thing we call nutrition and healing, because this is the subject.